Welcome back to another episode of Reflect Live, the podcast where stories come to life and hearts are opened. I am your host, Michelle. Here in Reflect Live, we offer a platform for people from all walks of life to share their experiences, their triumphs, and their challenges. It's a space where people thrive and connections are made through the power of storytelling. And today we have something truly special in store for you. So grab your favorite beverage, find a cozy spot, and let's dive into another episode of Reflect Live. Get ready to be inspired, moved, and maybe even crack a smile or two. This is Reflect Live with Michelle.
Hello, you've reached Michelle with Reflect Live podcast, and I have the pleasure to have Michelle Slavens here with me. Today, we have her on the show, and she's bravely going to open up her heart to share her journey through her profound loss, offering insight and resilience to the strength that she found in the midst of her grief. Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So just a little bit, because I want, this is your story, but your story has to do with your daughter. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So can you take us back and what you feel comfortable sharing?
I had a daughter. She would be turning 29 on the 13th of April. And so she was a very healthy baby. And at 5 months old, she passed away, and very unexpected passing away. And just to give a little brief, I haven't really shared the whole thing, and I'm not going to today, but she passed away to babysitter. And it was a long, drawn out journey of, a healthy baby and her passing away so quickly and not being able to say, that final goodbye to her. But it's taken me 28 years to physically, I'm not going to forget the loss of my daughter, but it's also was time for me to release all of the grief that I held inside. And so I recently was able to do that. And it's really changed my life. In a matter of, even a couple of weeks, it changed my life.
In the midst of this, you experiencing this happen to you, did you have hatred as well? Yeah.
I had hatred. I was raised a Christian, go to church when I was young, every Sunday, Sunday night, Wednesday night. At the time when she passed away, my husband and I weren't in church only because he worked Sundays. But God was present in my life, but I was mad for him for at least 10 years.
Oh, sure.
That's very common with people.
Yeah.
And, I don't apologize to God for that because he knows.
Sure.
He knows what I endured. But I do things now that I feel a way to show God that I know he's still there and he's still working in my life. And I never gave up. He never gave up on me, and I'm not about to give up on him. But I know he still loves me, even though I was mad for, at least 10 years.
I'm just trying to, so someone that's in your position, I was wanting to share just a little bit more what you're open to share with, because, whether there's people going through SIDS or, it's just stuff like that I'm trying to figure out what would be the best way to help somebody that's going through the situation that you went through.
Right. So initially, when I was at the hospital, they had brought my daughter in, obviously, and I was in a room with nobody, and they wouldn't tell me anything. And the amazing thing, the doctor on call was also the coroner, but he was also my childhood doctor. And he initially thought she had SIDS. It was not the case. And he did a lot of investigation into what happened, pieced together everything. She did have an autopsy. I will share that. She was, like I said, perfectly healthy, but they ruled it as accidental suffocation. And the reason I'm not going to go into it, it involved a lawsuit. And I feel like, number one, amazed that the doctor, coroner, whatever, took the time to really, truly find out what happened to my daughter. And I am so grateful for that. But I also never wanted anyone else to endure what I endured, because I know there's situations out there that could be similar. And, most people know is just she passed away to a babysitter. Some people don't even know that. But I feel like it was important to share a little bit of that, because very easily they could have ruled it as SIDS, but it was not the case in my situation. But, it's just one of those things that was a freak accident. And I spent years blaming myself that it was my fault for, number one, her being at a babysitter. And I had to learn through years of the grief that realized it wasn't my fault. And that's hard as a mother.
Yeah, sure.
I gave up all, I gave up on my child or something, but I know a lot of moms, dads feel that way, feel guilty, feel like it's their fault when it's not.
Yeah. I remember when my children were young, my first one specifically, and, I got to stay home with him with my work. So 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever they get off, and I just remember dropping him off at daycare, just crying, just because I didn't want to.
I worked obviously with my daughter, Casey, and I was off 6 weeks. So needless to say, I had to hurry, find a babysitter. And when I had my second child, my son, he was born 2 years later. I drove him a long way to my mother-in-law to watch him for the first 2 years of his life because of that. Yeah. And it was a strain. I'd take him to daycare at 6:30 in the morning, pick him up at 6:30 at night. But then it was good for him to be in daycare, number one. They taught him a lot. But then 4 years later, I had another daughter and I stayed home with her. And, the difference of both of my kids, one being in daycare, one not being in daycare, was huge. But I am so thankful that my son he learned a lot of things at 2 years old that most kids don't learn. But it's just because of what happened. I had to do whatever it was to endure that my child wasn't going to a babysitter. But it was different. Obviously, when I had my third child, I was in a position where I couldn't afford two in daycare, number one, but also just to be there with my daughter. And she was the type that just was laid back. She was just like her sister. My pregnancies were the same. It was crazy. They looked a lot alike in the beginning. And so she just entertained herself. So I like to think my first child would have been the same way too. But yeah, as a mom, I had to do it, both ways, but I wouldn't change it, the way it happened. And I just became a grandma and I have a grandson and I'm going to be watching him. And the same thing, I didn't want my daughter to have to take her baby. I don't want her to take him to daycare. So
yeah. Was this a licensed daycare or just like a mom and pop's type?
The babysitter or the daycare my son went to?
The babysitter.
She actually worked for a daycare and then she went out on her own.
I see. Yeah.
She was very young, early 20s, and she had a child of her own and she watched another child besides my daughter, but she had the background of a daycare, at least, or she appeared to have that.
And I asked that question just because a lot of listeners would say, well, I guess I should say a pessimist would say, well, that they wasn't licensed, they wasn't, experienced or whatever. Well, just like you said, personally, I don't think you need to have a college education if you have the skills and ability and knowledge to go forth, right? So I don't think whether it was licensed or not licensed, it wouldn't have mattered.
Right.
What do you feel about that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously she had 3 kids there, 2 toddlers and a baby. My daughter was sleeping at the time when it happened, but it can happen at home. I mean, what happened to her could have happened at home. Sure. So it's not, I don't know.
Yeah. So you said that, a couple years ago? Is that when you started healing?
Yeah, 4 years ago.
4 years ago. Yeah. So can you tell us about that journey? Because, if it was, what'd you say, 28 years?
28 years of grief.
So 24 years of grief.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the 4 years of journey of trying to heal. And can you walk through that with us?
Yeah, sure. So I'm with a nonprofit called On Angels Wings, and we were looking for a program to help our families that we deal with grief. And I never had any type of training or didn't even go to a support group until formed our own little support group. It's just, families are just talking. It's not really giving them anything to help them heal. And so my friend Michelle Kramer and we did this program called Grief Recovery Method. And we jam-packed our training in 4 days because it was right when COVID started. So we had to do it via Zoom. And we have people all over the world doing this along with us. And there's a book involved, and she had read the book. I did not. And the night before, she said, "Have you read the book?" And I said, "No." Why? What's going to happen? She just said, "You're going to be in for a rude awakening." And I'm thinking, I was a nervous wreck. I've never done anything like this. So obviously, we start learning and training through this book. And like I said, we had to jam pack all of this in, 4 days of time. But we were broken down into groups, like little rooms, basically, because we were via Zoom. But we're sharing things with people that we just have a small group together. So it's not like you're sharing to the whole world, what's going on in your life. But basically the program, like I said, it involves a book. And I'm going to share this because I feel it's important when I walk people through this. They have no clue what they're getting into. But in order for them to understand what grief recovery really can do, I need to share my own testimony because it is huge, really. Honestly, it is huge. And so when I did this, we start out in the book, you learn the myths of, grief and things like, people always say, I'm sorry. And that is not what you should be saying to people when they're grieving the loss of someone. And so I'm always one of those, I just want to give them a hug or the reassurance that I am there for them. And when they're ready to talk or whatever, that, they feel comfortable, they can. Like, I don't budge in their life and tell them how they should feel. I don't shove. This is a evidence-based program. It's not a faith-based program. So I don't shove God down their throat, even though I'm a believer, but so many people may not be. So in doing this, we had to do a loss graph. So when you think about that, at that time, this was 4 years ago, I had a lot of losses in my life, grandparents, just different things. And when you look at it, the biggest loss on there was my daughter, obviously, at the time. And so I'm thinking, I probably will work on the loss of my daughter. And we go through more training, and then you do what they call a relationship graph, and you take something from your loss graph that you're strictly dealing with one thing on there. And it may not be the specific loss itself. It may be something that was surrounding around that loss. And so we get to that point where we got to pick something off our graph. And you would think I would have chose my daughter. It's one of the biggest things that happened to me. But what I chose was, it was surrounded around the loss of my daughter, but it had to do with my husband. And the reason being is my husband and I, we had an amazing marriage, never talked about our loss of our daughter. And I can remember would have been her 16th birthday. He finally went to the cemetery with me and acknowledged her birthday. Now, he may have his own, I don't know, but he literally went with me, and that was just like huge for finally see him do that. But we never really sat down and really in depth talked how we felt. He constantly asked me, how do you feel? Are you doing okay? He was an amazing husband and amazing about always wondering how I was. But did I share how I felt? No. So I had my family fooled, my husband fooled, my friends fooled, thinking I was a strong woman and perfectly fine. And I was not. And this program was eye-opening to me to realize I need to finally share or show that I'm not okay. I'm living a life that people think, wow, she's got it all together. And on the outside, I did look like I had it together in a way. But on the inside, in the midst of doing this, I had so much that I really wished I would have told my husband in my loss. So when you get to doing your relationship graph, you get to a point where you got to do your forgiveness, and you've got to do basically you're saying all the things that you want to say them that, had to deal with it. And then you get to a point where you write a letter to that person. Now, it could be something that there's over 43 types of loss per se, a divorce, work, COVID. There's so many things out there that could be a loss, not necessarily of a person, a dog, a cat, So I chose this about surrounding the loss of my daughter, about my husband, and it affected our marriage. Even though I said it was a good marriage, it affected our marriage more on my part because I didn't feel worthy, and my husband never made me not feel unworthy. Like, it's just so many things surrounding the loss of my daughter. I just wanted to stay close to home. I didn't want to do things with him. And it all was from my grief. I held it in. And so going through this, I was able to release a lot of what I had inside of me that just pertained with my husband alone. Now, I read my letter. There was 3 other ladies in my little group. We all, shared our story. It was very emotional. And I'm telling you, it gets very emotional in this program.
Sure.
You have no idea how emotional it gets.
Sure.
And I am
Was it hard, Michelle? Was it like, I don't want to do this, I don't want to get in touch with the emotions? Was it hard to start?
Yeah. I mean, but once you get to that point where, especially the letter, that is your key important part. And once I got there, I'm like, oh my, like here we go. Like I am releasing so much just in one little portion about my poor husband, and he has no clue, this is going on. But what I want to share is the after part. My friend Michelle Kramer she's like, you need to tell everybody about this that's going through the program, because without him, like I said, he didn't know what I talked about. All he asked me when I came home was, how was it? I said, it was really good. He said, was it what you expected? I said, no. I said, it was more than that. And he said, did it help you? And I said, yes. And so that's all he asked. He never really, it's almost like, okay, she did something. Mm-hmm. But what it did for me personally, he could tell a difference in the way I acted on the inside and outside. And the reason I say inside is because I shared a little more with him. Okay. We started taking little, I would say 3-4 day trips, just wherever we decided we wanted to go. We loved antiquing. We started doing stuff. And obviously when you're in the car, you have to talk pretty much. And he was not big on, he like talked straight to the point, doesn't dwell on stuff. And I love to talk and I love to just drag it out. Yes. And I remember our first trip was to Waco, Texas. And actually it was started out, we were just doing Route 66 through Oklahoma. And he goes, we're only so many hours away from the Magnolia market. And I'm like, oh, that would be my dream, is to go there. So we went there and we talked, and he said, I'm not big on talking, but he shared a few things. And in the line of work he did, he worked in retail and he was stressed. And he said, I just love to drive and just, not say anything, but he obviously shared some things, not that we really talked about our daughter, but he shared some things that he was feeling at the time. And I did too. And so to be able to share a little bit on these small little trips here and there was amazing in a way for our marriage. In December of 21, my husband came down with COVID, and on Christmas Eve morning, he went in for an infusion, and his oxygen levels were too low for it. So he went straight into the emergency room. And my son had took him for the infusion, and he, needless to say, on Christmas Day night got put on a ventilator. So my last conversation with him was before the ventilator. And I remember, I'm going to use grief recovery here again. I remember that before he was put on the ventilator, I talked to him and I just said, God, it's in God's hands. And I have to believe that. And this is what has to be done. And he agreed. And I said, I love you. And the Lord will take care of you. He will take care of us. And I said, basically, this is what needs to happen. And so that was my last conversation with him. And then after that, he's put on the ventilator. And then 3 days before New Year's, I went in the hospital because I had COVID.
Oh my goodness.
So, he didn't know, obviously, that I had COVID. And I was in the hospital for 3 days. I come home on New Year's Day and I'm on oxygen for 3 weeks. And basically, he's in one hospital and I was in another. And I'm at home now and, I'm getting reports from the doctors and, it's just not looking good. And on the morning of January 7th, early in the morning, the nurse called. She said, he's going downhill. And if you want to say anything to him, you need to say it now. And if your children want to, I knew I couldn't come to the hospital. They were going to allow me to come, but I was on oxygen. So she put the phone up to his ear. She said, he'll be able to hear you. So I just start kind of the same thing. I had COVID. I had been in the hospital. I'm doing okay. The kids are okay. And just all this stuff that I wanted to share. And we had lost a friendship several years before. And I just had 3 months before just had done in grief recovery, the friendship that we lost and processed it. And I told him, all I told him was, I said, and the friendships, I said, some of those people are coming back into our lives. And that's all I said. I knew he would understand. But I truly believe by me processing and going through the grief recovery, that's another thing that helped me and know this person isn't in my life daily, but they are still there. that it made me a different person. And I wanted him to know that, you know, we'd given it to the Lord, but yet grief recovery was able to help me process it a little better and, you know, a little bit more understanding and be able to share that with him.
Sure.
You know, and then, you know, he passes away on the 7th of January in 22. And again, I've walked several people. We do groups. I'm certified in groups in person. I'm certified in person one-on-one and certified in online one-on-one. I still need to finish my training to do group online, but I can do it with people all over the world via Zoom. But I was working on 2 different ladies and we were doing one-on-one at different times. And this was just recently. It's a 7-week program. And I decide one of them, and I didn't know her. She was in another state. I didn't know anything about her. She came to me because she had heard about On Angel's Wings and grief recovery. And I had no idea. But when she opened up about sharing a couple of losses in the beginning, one of them was she lost a daughter. It was very recent. And I thought, it's time. I'm gonna work on my daughter. And so we did the 7-week process. And I was down to working on my letter and I was out of town. I was actually with Michelle Kramer, but I was out of town and it was perfect timing to write my letter. And I asked my friend Michelle, I said, can I read my letter to you? Even though I was going to share it with the other ladies that I was working with. But I just felt she needed to be the one. Number one, she knows somewhat of what I've endured, but she needed to see me in that vulnerable state in my letter. And so we were out of town and I was able to do that. And I can't even tell you the minute I released and dropped that letter, the weight that was lifted off my heart, it's just hard to describe.
Wow.
And to think about, that was 28 years of grief that held me back tremendously, that I was able to release it in a way that I finally said goodbye. Not goodbye to necessarily my daughter, but goodbye to that grief.
Yes.
And, you know, it was just amazing. And actually that night I have trouble sleeping. And that night I was able to sleep. And the next morning kind of slept in, went back to sleep, slept some more, you know. And when I got up, I felt like a new woman, you know, and so I have to share that process because only the people that I walk through will hear that process. Not that, I mean, I have shared a little bit. I am sharing more on Facebook than I ever have. And my friend Michelle told me you need to, because I feel like I'm sharing a little too much, but people saw a side of me that they only saw the side of this Michelle that thought she had it all together. Sorry. Now I'm sharing a little bit more private stuff. But it also, the amount of people that have come to me and said, I needed to hear that, or they have a better understanding. I had lunch with a friend right after I shared that she said, I didn't like the old Michelle. And I'm like, what? That I don't want you to take it in a bad way. But she said, and I went to church with this lady and she's lost her husband 9 years ago. And I'm getting ready to walk her through this program. And she just said, you look like you had it all together. You know, you never cried. And now I see that side of you that you cry. And, you know, now I realize you didn't have it all together, but you do now. And it kind of felt good to hear someone actually say that. People are coming out and saying, I like the new you. And so my husband, when he's got sick, before he went to the hospital, he said, you need to do things for yourself. You need to think for yourself. My husband planned every little trip we did. I never did any of it, you know, and I just always looked to him for advice or what do you think we should do? Where should we go? Like he wanted me to pick it and he would go, no, you need to do it for yourself. And so for the last 2 years, I basically didn't want to. I mean, I've had to do things on my own after he passed away, but I didn't want to think about it. And last October, I took a trip to Rome and then Mediterranean cruise. I took my sister-in-law with me, and that was something that he never wanted to do. And I was scared to death because I'd never hardly flown or been out of the United States. And when I was on that trip, I reflected and I realized I am on my own and I need to do things like this.
Yes.
Maybe not that drastic because that was, but so since then I've been thinking about, you know, I should do things more on my own. And so I booked it's just a weekend trip coming up that I'm going away on my own and I am doing things. People are like, whoa, like what has happened to you? But I am finally in a happy place. And I stress that to people. They're like, well, I can see it, but what is your secret? My friend asked me the other day, what is your secret? And I said, I released a lot of grief. It's amazing what you can do when you release that.
Yes.
And it was a hindrance in my life. It really was. Caused me to not be fearful and not want to do things. And so I'm taking these bold steps and sharing more and more because I feel that is where God wants me to be. I'm always an encourager. I'm involved in 4 different nonprofits, and not all of them involve children, but they all involve something that, I tend to draw myself to. And, I've always felt like it wasn't completely complete. And so, like I said, I want to write about my daughter, but my other goal has been for 24 years to write a children's book. And I am in the process of doing that and writing about one of our little kiddos that is part of On Angel's Wings and his little journey. But when my husband passed away, I said, God, where am I going? What to do? And I just started laying out, I want to write a book, and he's paving the way for me to do that.
Yeah.
And he's paving the way for me to share a little bit more about myself and my story, because I know there are so many people out there that could relate somehow, maybe with my grief, but losing a spouse or losing a child. And, they're in the same thing I'm in, where you just feel like you're just in circles and every day feels like Groundhog Day. And it's the same thing over and over. And that's how I felt. And I slowly started adding these new things into my life.
Michelle, when we were talking about Groundhog's Day, and I know that we're over 30. So really, really quick, if a person is in that same rut, feeling like it's a Groundhog Day, what would be your advice for step 1 for them?
Honestly, everyone's going to be different, but I feel that I slowly started adding something new each day. Even though everything felt the same, I started adding something new. Like I got a trainer and I started working out, and because it made me feel good. I started, contacting friends that I have or people that I haven't seen in a long time and just sitting down with them. And I'm living my life, number 1. But I just feel like you could very easily stay in a ball, which I did the first 2 years of losing my husband. I certainly did with the loss of my daughter. But you need to slowly put yourself out and do a little something. Maybe it's start a collection of plants. Just little things. Yes, something. And, it doesn't have to be a support group or, anything like that, or just giving back and volunteering for something. That's what I did a lot of in the beginning. I volunteered. And then when I had other children, I was involved in their stuff. So I would say every day, try to add something new so it's not the same, even though it feels the same, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. That's great advice. So at the end of the broadcast, I always ask my guests to leave with words of wisdom. What would be words of wisdom that you would leave for our audience?
So I'm doing it right now. I am living my life to the fullest, like this is my last day. And number 1, love yourself. You have to love yourself. I didn't for so long. And I am in a very happy place. And I want to share that. And I just want to enjoy life, well, whatever I have here on earth. But I also want to help people, encourage them, and let them know that they're not alone. That's the big thing. We're not alone, even though we think we are. And so, just live your life, or try to live your life to the fullest, even if you don't feel like living it, because it's very important.
Buy a plant, do something small.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. Yeah. All right. Well, you take care.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching and listening to this episode on Reflect Live Podcast. Next up, Wendy Lind E. Saturday, June 1st. 10 to 10:30 a.m. Central Standard Time. Dive into the transformative world of red light therapy as Wendy discusses its profound effects on everything from skin rejuvenation to deep muscle healing. With her unique blend of professional backgrounds, Wendy offers a comprehensive look at how this innovative technology is revolutionizing wellness practices.
Listen on Spotify, iHeart, iTunes, or live stream on Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram.
Register now on www.reflectlivepodcast.com. Follow so you don't miss out on new live stream episodes.